Gary, can you give us your opinion on the cost of living crisis? We'd love to know where you think it's come from.
Okay, so my background, as I said, is I look a lot at inequality, and I make money by understanding how inequality will affect the economy, and I think economists tend to miss this. So at the beginning of COVID in 2020, straight away I wanted to know, what is COVID going to do to inequality? It was actually quite interesting, right? Because COVID was like quite an interesting economic experiment of what if the government just gives out the money to everybody who's not making money, basically, and essentially prints the money. We knew that the government was going to pour a huge amount of money in. It ended up being £450 billion. I think it's important to stop and just think a little bit about how much that is, because I know when we hear massive numbers, we just think that's a massive number. £450 billion is not just a massive number. It's a truly, truly enormous number. It's £10,000 for every single adult in the country. So it's about a third of the whole GDP of the country, right? And that amount of money was printed and given out during COVID. So when that happens, I think it's very, very important that you stop and ask the question, who's going to end up with that money? And that is a very interesting question, because the answer is quite counterintuitive, right? I think the first thing we think is, okay, well, that went to, for example, furloughed workers. Furloughed workers are often low-paid workers. Often it's poorer people in society. So you're thinking, okay, this should be good for inequality because the government is giving money to poorer people. But if you actually look at the situation of those furloughed workers, they're not richer, right? They're getting money from the government, but they're not getting their wages. And in fact, what they're getting is less than what they were getting before. So even though these guys are the initial recipients of the money, there's a question of who ends up with the money. And I was sitting there at the beginning of COVID trying to work this out, right? And the reason that workers are not rich is because they're not getting their wages. So who's got the wages? Okay, it's the corporations. But are corporations richer? Well, actually, no, because they've been closed down. So they've lost their incomes. Okay, well, where do corporations' incomes normally come from? It's customers. And actually, this is the correct answer. The people who accumulate that £450 billion are customers. But it's not all customers, right? So most people at home are customers. They're probably not sitting on 10 grand cash. And that's because the amount of money you accumulate depends on how much luxury spending you have. So rent, mortgage, food, bills, those expenditures remain. The kind of expenditures which stopped were basically luxury, non-essential, what economists call discretionary spend. So people accumulated cash during COVID, which ultimately came from the government, basically exactly proportional to their usual discretionary or luxury spend. So who has the most luxury spend? Well, it's rich people. So basically money was accumulated pretty much exactly proportionally to how rich you were. So during COVID, there was this massive, truly enormous transfer of cash channeling through poor people, but ultimately ending up with the richest people in society. And that amount of money was so huge that it was inevitable that after COVID, we wouldn't go back to business as usual, because £450 billion has been transferred from the government to the rich. And to give a sense of how much money that is, the total amount of money which the government is now offering to support people in the cost of living crisis is £15 billion, which is about £300 per adult in the country, and is 30 times less than the amount of money that has gone from the government to the rich. It's truly enormous. It's truly enormous. And I think the thing which people need to realize is that money is still there. Rich people have an absolutely ungodly amount of money now, far more than they had 3 years ago. And, if I was to ask you, what do you think would happen if we printed, if it's £10,000 per person, but if it's all gone to the top 10%, that means the average person in the top 10% has made £100,000 cash per person. And if I was to ask you, what do you think would happen if we printed out £100,000 cash for every single person in the top 10% of the country and gave it out? If you stop and thought about that, you would say, well, that will probably cause a crisis of inequality, of cost of living for ordinary people, and of inflation. I would encourage people, if they get time, to go and look at the first video on my channel, which was from June 2020, where I predicted those things would happen, and read the articles that I wrote at the beginning of COVID. So if you ask me, what we are seeing now is the inevitable consequence of the transfer of a truly ungodly amount of cash from the government to the rich. And those rich people have that cash. If the rich get much richer in a time when the economy is not growing, then you got poorer. But if the way that happens is money going to the rich, you don't see that happening. But what you see is the prices going up. So if you ask me, we're seeing a crisis of inflation, which is caused by an enormous increase in inequality. And all the statistics support that. And that inequality is manifesting for ordinary people as higher prices in the shops and higher house prices and stock prices.
So essentially, what you're really saying is we need to get back Robin Hood.
Robin Hood with his band of men.
And start taking from the rich and giving. I'm obviously, now I'm not suggesting that we do actually do that, but there's an element of that. And it's very interesting as well from a historical perspective. Robin Hood is always been seen as a folk hero for probably over 500 to 800 years.
Yeah.
And yet the governments that have been in power for the last 10 years all like the idea of trickle down economics.
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask Richard What are your thoughts on what Gary said? And
thank you for asking. I think that was such an excellent analysis of how we've got here by Gary there. I didn't disagree with a single thing there. I guess my perspective is, where are we going to go now? Now, I think we have a population that is uniquely ill-equipped to deal with inflation. Most people of a younger generation aren't used to inflation. I vaguely remember when I was a kid in the 80s, inflation. We've got used to 2% inflation, 3% inflation, maybe every now and then a little bump, and that's about it. And I think people are forgetting what a 10% inflation will mean. Now, if you sit back and do nothing while prices are going up by 10% and your wages are sitting where they are, that's not just 10% this year, that's 10% of your entire future spending potential wiped out. And as Gary says, that's you getting less goods and services, but there's not less goods and services out there. They're just going to be redistributed to other people. And this is why I think it kind of links in with some of the rhetoric we're getting from the terrible twins, the Tory party candidates at the moment, about trying to clamp down on unions that are fighting for their wages. Many unions are actually currently fighting for a real terms pay cut for their members, which is ridiculous. And I don't think there's ever been a time in the recent past where people have really had to stand up for themselves just to keep pace with what's going on. Because if you snooze this year and you fall behind, that's going to be 5, 6, 7% of your entire future gone as a result of that. And of course, the other thing that this is going to lead to, which again, people are now uniquely ill-equipped for, is high interest rates. Now, I think there's going to be two big victims here. First of all, homeowners who've got used to stretching how far they can go on 2 to 3% mortgages. There's going to be a heck of a shock and a redistribution there. And of course, our ridiculously overstretched government. You can't exist with GDP ratios to debt, debt to GDP ratios, I should say, of more than 100%. When interest rates rise, the interest payments alone are going to be absolutely ridiculous there, which is why I do believe that the UK economy now resembles a very, very dangerous Ponzi scheme, quite frankly. And when you listen to Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, you kind of think Rishi Sunak's, oh my God, we've got to do something. This is awful. And Liz Truss is just, yeah, it's over anyway. Let's just have a party. Because the policies coming out at the moment are just not addressing the issues. Now, obviously, I'd also be remiss if I didn't just remind everybody that at the end of the day, Brexit knocked 20% off the value of the pound against the dollar, meaning that oil prices denominated in dollars are now 25% more expensive. And although that might not be the major part of all starts of supply chains, if you add a 25% cost to any transport cost on any industry, you are naturally going to build in inflation. So if we want a solution, let's rejoin the EU. Hopefully it will revalue the pound a bit and tackle some of the input prices.
Max, what are your thoughts?
I think there's another thing to think about here is how when it comes to wealth transfer from within the middle class, for example, it was a case of if you had a home, you would transfer it to your children, or if you had money in the bank, you would invest it and you would transfer that wealth onto your descendants. But I think with the cost of living crisis, we've seen how especially older people are being forced to sell their homes to pay for health, pay for social care.
Elsie is 77. She's a widow and she's a pensioner who lives in a council house. She receives a pension of £170 a week. Her energy bills have gone from £17 a month to £85 a month.
Yeah.
She will pay an additional £816 a year. To cut down on spending, Prime Minister, Elsie has now resorted to eating one meal a day. She goes to the supermarket at the end of the day to buy yellow sticker discounted items. She gets up early in the morning to use her Freedom Bus Pass to stay on buses all day to avoid using energy at home.
And this is in a sense the middle class losing out on an aspect of wealth. I'd like to get both of the guests' opinion and Alex yourself as well on that. After maybe we can get your opinion. First, we can get your opinion on the cost of living crisis. But I think this is also something that not many people are talking about.
There's a discussion to be had about everything related to the economy. You know, the American dream is starting from scratch and building up. Part of the ethos behind it is not to have anything and build now. I've heard a number of billionaires, Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, make mention of this. being like, maybe you should really start off with nothing, and everyone sort of starts off on equal footing. We just take all the money that they've accumulated over their life and regenerate it into the economy. A lot of people will be like, well, I've earned that money, it's already been taxed. Why on earth would I have to give it back to the government? That doesn't make any sense. I should be able to choose what I do with that money because you've already taken your cut. So there's definitely a big discussion to be had about that. Richard, what are your thoughts on inheritance tax?
It's a very interesting question, isn't it? I have always thought it absolutely bizarre that people would be very, very concerned about inheritance tax, which to me seems like the fairest tax there is. Why tax people when they work during their lives when you can tax them at the end of it? So I'm all in favour of people enjoying their own creative wealth within the economy. I'm not so much in favour of their kids just getting it because they happen to be their kids. So I see a good argument for wealth transfer taxes. And let's not forget, if you are, and I don't count myself as a capitalist, but obviously I exist within the capitalist system, but if you are to look at pure capitalism and how capitalism works, capitalism comes with its own natural tax rate, the real GDP level applied to wealth above the mean level. Capitalism itself abhors tax on income. It abhors punishing people for going to work, and it would be all in favour of trying to take money off the accumulated wealth as it's transferred over. So in a nutshell, wealth transfer taxes, I think, are the way forward. Wealth taxes themselves, again, also the way forward as well. Income taxes, corporation taxes, less so.
Do you know what the tax rate was under Franklin Delano Roosevelt if you earn over 200K in 1930?
I can honestly say I do not know that off the top of my head.
90%? No?
Ooh. Do we have a bid from Gary? What do you think it was? 200K, 1930s?
I think Max is right. Famously, the Beatles paid 95%, but this is a different time period. I think the top rate that the US hit was 90, but I'm not sure that was the timing. But I think Max is right. So I'll say 89 and let him take it.
Oh, very socialist of you. 94%.
Oh, I went the wrong side.
94. Yeah, but interesting, isn't it? Over 200K. Imagine that today. Getting a tax rate 90. Conservatives will be up in arms. But imagine what you could do with that money. Even if you did it for 1 year. What you could do with that money. And there's something to be said about when you're in an emergency situation. Maybe there is an element of going, look, we're going to tax you 1 year, this high rate, that's it, and then back to business as usual, and then redistribute that fund.
But why tax income? Why tax the people who are going to go to work every day and generate the income for us, rather than taxing the wealth of those who are sitting back doing nothing?
Because the argument, and I'm only going from an FDR perspective here, so for the 1930s, they had a massive economic crash, one of the worst in capitalist history. They couldn't create jobs. They had already tried under Harding to set up a system where it was private enterprise with a little bit of government interference. And they were saying to private enterprise, you guys have to put the money in. You have to keep wages at a certain level. Don't let it drop. And it was all down to cooperation. But the damage that had been created, it's interesting to go back to the causes of this crisis. In my opinion, from the research that I've done, I would actually blame the government, because the government went to the farming communities and said, we want you to produce more food to help out with World War I. So you go, well, the cause of World War I is governments. The cause of the farming crisis is the US government. They've then gone to private enterprise and said, can you get us out of this? These are a few ideas. It wasn't good enough. Right, so government's going to have to step in and redistribute that wealth for a short period of time by creating jobs for low-level income. And you're sort of going, well, if Harding's tried to do it on a free enterprise basis and it didn't work, but then FDR did it and then it improved, but did it completely solve the problem is debatable. You can then go, well, that seems like part of the solution. But I get what you're saying as well. And I'm not advocating this necessarily. I think every single economic situation should be taken into account separately. But on that particular occasion, we can say there was improvement. It didn't solve it. And it did have an attempt to try and just say, look, free enterprise, you try and solve this. And they couldn't. It was too big a problem. I'd say with quantitative easing, which I've heard Gary talk about on a few occasions in his videos, and I think you and I, Richard, have talked about it on a few occasions, being like, this has caused poverty. So like, for example, an average person's income over a lifetime is 2 million for the average person. Well, if you've just printed off 450 billion, that's going to wipe out the worth and the value of that 2 million that you're meant to earn over your lifetime. And it's going to mean that it's actually worthless. So then you're going, well, that's a government problem that they've created. So the only solution is to have the government once again interfere, because I don't think private enterprise can solve this on its own, especially with the restrictions that we put on. Feel like I've been going on too long. Gary.
I've said what I think is the cause of the problem, and which is that, you know, the transfer of a truly enormous amount of money to rich people. And, you know, some people might disagree with that, and we can talk about whether that's really the cause, but that has happened. I don't think it's arguable that has happened. You know, if you believe that the problem has been caused by the transfer of a huge amount of cash to the richest people in society, if you're serious about solving that problem, realistically, you have to look at how can we take a huge amount of cash from the richest in society. You know, if we were to tax the richest people in our society enough to make them only as rich as they were 3 years ago, we could increase our support for struggling families in the cost of living crisis by 3,000%. Wow. We gave £450 billion to the richest in society, and now we're supporting families who can't turn their heating on with £15 billion, 30 times less. So all you would be doing is making the richest people in this country as rich as they were 3 years ago, and you could support struggling families who in many cases can't feed their kids 30 times more than you are now. And this is why I'm very pessimistic about the future of this country, but not even really this country, because it's happening in a lot of places.
Yes.
We caused a £450 billion problem, and we are trying to fix it with £15 billion solutions. Nobody is grasping the scale of this. Not even close.
No. Can I ask, why aren't we hearing more from the likes of the Labour Party about this? This is fundamental. You can't fix a lot of the problems unless we actually realise what has happened here. And I'm not hearing anything from the Labour Party. We're not going to talk about Brexit, but we're just talking about this issue here. This massive amount of wealth that has been transferred to people who already had a lot of money, and now there's a real reason to take that money back. As you said, making people, you know, taking money from them, putting them into a position where they were as rich as 3 years ago. We're talking about people who have unbelievable amounts of money. Why aren't the Labour Party and other parties on the left maybe pushing this?
Well, I think, Max, Keir Starmer made, I don't know if everyone saw it just as we came onto air, the breaking news. Keir Starmer's made his position very clear. The one minister who went out to support the people striking to get more pay was sacked from the Labour front bench for supporting strikes. And I think that tells us exactly what we need to know. Labour do not think they need to bother with working class people because they don't think they've got anywhere else to go. So they're going to focus their fire on trying to keep their red wall voters back. And I don't think they need to address this particular issue. And if they do get elected, and let's be frank, it's going to be a race to the bottom if Liz Truss becomes the next Tory leader, it will be by default. And they will inherit a horrendous situation they're then going to have to develop policy on. And I'm hearing so many people online on services like Twitter talking about how they're voting for Keir Starmer because they believe he's going to do something totally different from what he says. I don't normally say many good things about Keir Starmer, but one thing I will say, I do think he's an honest person. And I think when he says what he's going to do in government, he means what he's going to do in government. And I think if all of us allow him to get towards the election with these policies in place unchallenged, that's what we're going to have to live with for the next 5 years.
You talk about the Labour Party, and, you know, I've got my opinions about Keir Starmer and the current Labour leadership. But what I think is interesting is it's not just actually the Labour Party that I'm not really talking about, this massive transfer of wealth to the richest. You know, you're sitting in Italy now, I believe, right, Max? And you know, I haven't heard any real left-wing parties really make this case. But not only left-wing parties, I haven't really heard anyone in the media make this case. And I think that really, like, from where I'm sitting, I think that what we have is, you know, so, okay, I'm an economist. So I went to London School of Economics. I went to Oxford. I worked in the city. What I see when I look at economics broadly is a subject which has very, very poor class diversity, is not really populated by many people who are actually being hurt by this. They're all doing fine, thanks, mate. And they've been wrong about everything for 15 years, and they never get spanked for it. You know, so really, I came out 2 years ago and I said, we're going to see a cost of living crisis, a crisis of inflation, a crisis of inequality. At the same time, Larry Elliott, who is chief economics editor of The Guardian, put out an article saying there's going to be a collapse in house prices. Okay, where's the punishment for Larry Elliott? No punishment. And, you know, when I worked in the city, you know, very quickly I became famous in the city because I was the guy whose predictions were right. But in journalism, in politics, that doesn't matter. So what you end up with, you know, if you have a system in economics that does not reward people being right and does not punish being wrong, then first of all, you will have no social mobility because people like me who are good at being right but don't have any social capital will have no way to get to the top. And you will end up with a posh boys club of people who are constantly wrong and no one ever notices. So really, I think the problem is deeper, right? Because we gave out £450 billion. If you're going to do that, you absolutely 100% must do analysis of who's going to end up with the money. No one in government did it. No one in opposition did it. No one in media did it. No one in academia did it. What we really have here is a situation where economics is full of rich, posh idiots. And then if you are one person who actually understands what's happening and can predict it correctly, you can work in those skyscrapers over there and get paid £1 million a year to shut the fuck up, which is what happened to me. You know what I mean? And I think that the situation is much worse than that. It's not the case of that the Labour Party is malign. It's a case of we have absolutely filled all of our economics institutions with people who don't really know what's happening and are not incentivized to be right. I think it's a collapse of the discipline intellectually, and it's really upsetting and really worrying that I worked in the city and there are some good guys in the city, but the best guys in the city are getting paid £1 million, £2 million a year, and they are not going to tell you what's happening. The privatization of knowledge and good analysis.
Gary, I hope you don't mind me asking. I wonder what your opinion is of the new economic genius we have in terms of Liz Truss telling us that tax cuts is going to bring inflation down. What's your thoughts there?
I mean, you know, I think you don't need to ask me. I mean,
I try to keep a straight face. Sorry.
I mean, it's.
Go on, Gary.
But look, you know, I've never met Liz Truss. You know, I'm sure she's a lovely woman. If she wants to go for a drink, she can put a message on my YouTube. But, you know, the economics discussion is at a level which is ludicrous. But I think we need to take the responsibility that we have as economists and people who work in the media to highlight this and to provide good information and say, look, that is what we can do, what we must do. We have to say, look, the information you are being given is from people who are not reliable and are not trustworthy, and they have their own interests and they're misleading you. And we need to make clear what the consequences will be to ordinary people and their children and their grandchildren. And we need to give clear information that people can understand. So, you know, we can sit and we can point and laugh at Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. And, you know, I do a fair bit of that, you know, especially Rishi Sunak if people see my work. We need to build something. We need to start, you know, we need to use our knowledge to tell people, look, you know, the problem is much bigger here. You know, this economic situation is not a temporary situation. You know, it's important what you said, Richard, that this is going to last. It's going to last for a lifetime. And you know, if my analysis is right, and I've made billions of pounds off of my analysis, then it gets worse from here. And that is not a nice message. It's not a message I like to deliver, but it's a message people need to know. But I think the flip side is, you know, if I'm right, and, you know, I do think I'm right, and these banks will pay me a lot of money because they think I'm right, it's absolutely fixable. You just need to get serious about distribution, about inequality, about taxation of the richest, about fairness in taxation, and we can go back, you know, if we can give the rich 450 billion, we can take from the rich 450 billion. And we have to.
Can I ask both of you, and Alex as well, could this cost of living crisis be a catalyst to get this moving, to open people's minds and realize we don't actually have to accept this, we can have something different? Maybe, Richard, do you want to go first?
I think it can, but only in a very painful way. And I think at the moment, there are a lot of people starting to discover how painful this economic situation is. And I think it is going to force some quite desperate behavior on people eventually. I mean, it's like, Gary, this figure of 450 billion, it's a huge... The way I always think of these numbers is, I know the maths has changed a bit, but we're still roughly in the position where an average person during the course of their life, earning an average salary, doing an average 40 years, will earn in today's terms roughly £1 million. So when you say to me 450 billion, I'm thinking 450,000 people's lives being tossed into the inferno there, just to be grabbed up by very, very greedy people. And indeed, thinking about, well, we'll go back to Rishi Sunak, 750 million wealth. That's 750 people's lives that one man has. And this is why I think never was the argument for taxing the highest wealth ever stronger than it was now. And I agree with Alex when he says having a one-off tax would be very useful. But yes, I think a one-off wealth tax of quite a punitive rate on wealth hoarded over, say, 10 million, because I don't think there's any one individual that's worth as much as 10 people's lives. So any individual that is currently worth more than 10 million is taking more than their fair share of society's resources. And yes, I do think the cost of living crisis will be a catalyst for change. My worry is that it'll be a change where we get more people at the top of society telling us how things are, making us a little pathway just to ease the short-term pain and lull the population into moving into a lower average wealth consumption of those on the lower levels.
It's interesting you say that it could end up with the wealth telling us what to do. I assume part of the reason Starmer went to the Sun was to try and get into Rupert Murdoch's good books. Because Rupert Murdoch, from his perspective, from Labour's perspective, is probably still a kingmaker. It's interesting as well today, Murdoch's just it looks like Murdoch's shifting support from Trump. That'll be interesting to see how much influence he has over there with Fox. So there's definitely an element of like Starmer going, move to the centre, get into power, show what we can do. And who knows, by the next election, he'll look to go even more to left, or maybe he'll just stay the course. It's disappointing that is a possibility, that it could end up going back up to the rich. Interestingly, this similar situation took place in the United States, and FDR was able to put in those high tax rates, in part because of, and I've got to be very careful how I phrase this, there was an alleged, and there was evidence to support it, an alleged coup, an ex-US Army general who was approached by business people to do a coup on the United States. And
the plan as outlined to me was to form an organization of veterans, to use as a bluff, or as a club at least, to intimidate the government and break down our democratic institutions. The upshot of the whole thing was that I was supposed to lead an organization of 500,000 men, which would be able to take over the functions of government.
And he then went to the government and said, I've been approached by the business groups to do an attempt to a coup on the United States. The problem I see is that, again, looking from a historical perspective, these things have happened in the past, and eventually you'll have a bit of pressure put on these large business groups. What you don't have is it's sustained. So the thing that governments always want to do is try and reduce tax, especially if you're a Republican or if you're a conservative Tory. And that's to get more money for the economy to spend on more services. And so what they'll do is they'll road stuff very slowly. If you look at America and the crashes, after Roosevelt implemented a lot of his strategies to reduce spending from banks, this changed over time, especially when you had Republican parties coming in and then going, right, we want less regulation because that'll free up our markets and that'll make us have more profits and you'll get more tax. And you can go, look at the balanced budget we've done, look at the great work we've done. And I think there's an interesting problem within that. It's the system itself that eventually encourages people to increase their greed, but it's also within corporations and banks. Because if you're on a board of directors, your number one goal is to show how great you are. And you do that by showing off, I've made this amount of profit. Look, last year, that bloke or woman made 70 billion. This year, I made 75, and that's because we got stuff deregulated and I made more profit. The entire system is geared towards profit. I want to say greed, but I think that's not fair. I think it's geared towards profit. And I think there's a problem within the system that is where you get that balance between capitalism and socialism. But then you've got a bigger question of, is capitalism out of date? Like if you've got hyper productivity, which again, Richard, you and I have talked about, and I'll give an example. If we stop clothes production today, we'd still have enough clothes for between 25 and 50 years. Why are we producing more clothes? What is the point in that? I don't understand. Like, do we really need more fashion walks and clothing on that scale, it doesn't make too much sense to me. I've gone on too long. Max, what do you think?
I'm not even sure where to start. There's so much to say there, but I think it is interesting the idea that we're producing a lot for a market that doesn't exist, or we're creating a market, sort of putting the cart before the horse in a sense. But I'd be interested also to hear what Gary has to say about that.
Yeah, Max, you asked if this can be a catalyst for change, right? And Alex, you spoke about the sort of the social circumstances that were behind allowing this move towards much higher tax rates on the rich in during the FDR period. This is the kind of thing I've been thinking about a lot recently, which is, first of all, this will be a catalyst for change. I'm very, very confident of that. But I cannot at all guarantee you it will be a catalyst for positive change, right? Because what I can tell you with almost certainty is this is going to, first of all, in this winter, half of this country will not be able to heat their homes. Okay, that is, that's not really arguable. You can argue about the exact number, but that's going to happen. And then there's going to be another sort of 20% above that who will be able to heat their homes, but only at the cost of their entire disposable income. Okay, so then that will have like knock-on effects throughout the whole economy, because you wiped out the disposable income of a massive chunk of your population, so then they're not spending. So then that cuts the wages of a lot of other people. And, that will lead to this. For example, if I consider my parents, they were probably going to have a relatively comfortable retirement, but now they'll probably end up having to sell their home to get to their retirement, which means then my sister won't have a property. So you see these kind of things I thought trigger through. So the human situation is very bad, and people are not idiots. And, that is coming on the back of basically 15 years of continually bad human situation for most people. So people will be hungry for change. But in a space where the economic situation is not being explained clearly and is often being explained by people who have an interest to defend the rich and say, don't tax the rich, then the sort of positive message, which, I would like to consider my message to be a positive message of, look, we can have a much better life if we just fix the taxation of the rich, can get drowned out by negative messages, So people really, really, really want change, but then it creates this space of what kind of change do we get? And I'm arguing one thing, but, you mentioned Rupert Murdoch. The Rupert Murdoch press is not going to argue the same thing. Maybe they're going to blame foreigners. Maybe they're going to try and they're going to try and get us to be angry at other groups, other minority groups, or at one another instead of being angry at them. So we will get change. I want to make it good change. And I guess I'm sort of interested to throwing it back to Alex, because, I also read a bit of history, and I know that there's not actually that many times in history where we see a shift towards much higher taxation of the richest. This FDR period is one which you mentioned, and there's also the post-Second World War period in many, many countries, most countries in Europe. What do you think? At the moment, many politicians are very rich. I don't really trust them to do it. So I'm trying to build a message which targets ordinary people. So why do you think it was that in the FDR period, first of all, the politicians themselves, be they FDR or other powerful politicians, decided to do that, despite the fact that they're probably quite rich? And secondly, what was it in the minds of the people, if you think they were an important agent in it, that meant that they were pushing for that at that time, whereas now a lot of people might not be pushing in that direction for higher taxation of the rich?
So from what I've read and understood, part of the reason that FDR did this is because he was going, there's such huge levels of poverty in the countryside that the communists are making inroads, and I don't want them in. Not only that, he had the leverage of the fact that he found out a load of rich guys had attempted a coup. So it was like, right, it's almost like the equivalency.
So he wasn't doing it out of the good of his heart. It was a fear of communism.
There's an element with FDR that he was a strong socialist and a libertarian as well. Not many people know about the brand new constitution he was going to bring in, which was going to guarantee housing. He'd been ill with polio, so he was unable to walk. So there's a number of people that would suggest that he was keen to empathize with people who were also suffering from from the hardships of life. You could debate over that. His wife was an absolute powerhouse, Eleanor Roosevelt, and very pro equal rights, and definitely pushed it on him during World War II. I think there's different elements that allowed FDR to put forward that platform. But the other key thing is they tried the free enterprise stuff under Harding, and they just didn't do anything. like it didn't make a difference. The poverty was still there. And he just went, look, let's approach this from a new angle. Keynes had come into 1936, hadn't he, with his theories. So if he came in 1936, it's a new ethos towards how you deal with these things, you know, spend and poor and reduce and good. And so there's an element of that as well. I think that's the best way I can answer. I think it's different elements from different areas. Would
you guys say there's a big difference today is that we have a right-wing media convincing ordinary people that it's actually better if the rich earn more money, it will eventually trickle down, or that if you are rich, it means it's because you have done that hard work, and there is this idea that if you're poor, it's really your own fault. And maybe also back in the 1930s and 40s, we didn't have the number of billionaires or multimillionaires that we do today.
With the right-wing media point, though, I mean, obviously we did have this sort of glasnost in the 90s when Murdoch and Blair were hugging and there's joy on the streets. But prior to that, wasn't the media pretty much always the same sort of attitudes they were prevailing? I don't recall sort of any of the media being particularly liberal on any issues, economic or social, in the 70s and 80s. If anything, the liberal agenda has moved on, just not the economically liberal.
Were there more socialist papers, though, around within the 50s, 60s, 70s? Is that not a possibility, especially up north? I wonder if that had any influence on anything. But I always felt it was socialist with a nationalist element, especially up north. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Richard.
I think you might be right. I mean, one of the things I was interested in what you were saying with I wasn't really familiar with the FDR period and the 90% tax and the revolution, but it did remind me, we had a very similar period in the 70s in the UK, because obviously we had Dennis Healey with his let's squeeze the rich till their pits squeak. We had the 90% tax rate. And of course, we had the rumoured coup, which Harold Wilson was famously utterly paranoid about as well.
Wilson believed he'd been the victim of a conspiracy, and he had a highly unusual proposal for them.
Business groups and other anti-democratic agencies, these people are putting our whole idea of democracy at risk.
What might have turned out to be the reason for the resignation might lie somewhere in what he was saying and what was gradually unfolding.
It was mind-blowing stuff, I mean, by any standards.
Our democracy needs protecting. Would you be interested, if you're a journalist, what else would you be aiming for?
So maybe there is a link that the politicians do think, at the end of the day, it's not just their greed, that they can only keep social stability if they keep tax at a low level. Maybe that's what makes them so timid.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, there was rumour, wasn't there? Because the army turned up at one of the airports and no one could fathom as to why the army had turned up. Was it Gatwick or Heathrow? They turned up in force and everyone was like, there's no bomb threat. Why are you here? And also, it's not the army's responsibility to deal with bomb threats. So why have you turned up at the airport? Just happened to be coincidentally at the same time.
I was a bit young to remember, but...
Definitely before my time.
Brexit made us poor. 5, 6 right-wing politics. 7, 8 Boris hate. 9, 10 paint us black again.
Oh yeah, he's a full-on conspiracy theorist. I did a series of videos on it. He's full on. So he doesn't believe in climate change, which he advocated for. I think he's changed his tune now recently, suggesting that, he's been convinced. But there's an amazing bit where he pulls out in the EU Parliament this sheet showing the Arctic Circle covered in ice, saying, see, it's bigger. And then if you go into the detail and you listen to the NASA descriptions of what he's showing, they're going, yeah, it's wider, but it's not as thick.
But Farage worked for a company a few years ago that promoted like reforestation and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think Farage is the ultimate weather vane, isn't he? He'll blow whichever way the right-wing wind is blowing, and they all take massive dollops of influence from the American right. I mean, this whole thing about drag queen readings that's suddenly becoming a big thing in the UK with the patriotic right, they're all kind of campaigning against them. I noticed that that's been going on in America for many, many months further down the line. And I think what Farage does is he's a plagiarist. He's the Cliff to the Donald Trump's Elvis. He's kind of
but
he's taking the same material, doing the same thing, and people think it's original, but it really isn't. Yeah.
And on the climate change thing, I kind of view him as one of these, like, not so much climate change deniers, but what I call climate change it'll be finers. And you just know that if say in 80 years, well, he won't be around in 80 years time, but if he was, and mankind has managed to alleviate the worst aspects of climate change, he'll be there going, see, it was fine. We didn't need to worry, despite the fact that would have been achieved, people working tirelessly to counteract people like him.
It's like Mark Carney with Brexit. Mark Carney tried to undo, before Brexit happened, he tried to put in place at the Bank of England as many measures as possible to mitigate the damage of Brexit. And then, because at the beginning it wasn't as bad as we thought it would be, the Brexiteers are of course claiming some sort of, see, it wasn't bad. Yeah, because we knew that it was important to put some measures in place to mitigate against it.
Well, that's the same thing with the Y2K bug back in 2000, isn't it? And that everybody poured huge amounts of effort into making sure that the computer systems around the world didn't crash when Y2K kicked in. It worked. And so everybody then went, oh, that was a waste of time. And you see the same thing with the vaccine, the anti-vax logic. People go, oh, look, it's all coming down by itself. Well, the fact that hundreds of millions of people have had vaccinations doesn't seem to be taken into account. Oh, it's all cured itself. No, it hasn't. The science and the vaccinations, and it's so whenever risk is mitigated, these people say, oh, there wasn't a problem, which is, it's like driving around and never using your insurance. A very peculiar state of mind.
We are so gonna get like the X-Files theme tune starting this all off, and we'll have a big
I want to believe.
And maybe we can start off on Brexit. Otto, can you tell us, how is Brexit going at the moment?
Next, no. It's going really well, isn't it? I mean, if you don't agree with it, I think it's going brilliantly. The trouble with Brexit all along is that at every juncture of disaster in the road, we are having a lesson in cognitive dissonance, basically, with the cultists insisting that everything is fine with the project itself, but that everybody else is damaging and flooring it somehow and holding back its potent power that will unleash Britain into the world. I genuinely thought back in 2016 and certainly by 2020 that we would have moved on from that. But I think we're now in territory where that denial will go on forever. I think people will forever, Brexit itself has become akin to a sort of religion for the diehards. And I don't think they'll ever shift it. They will never stop believing in this glorious project. Meanwhile, the rest of us are dragged along with it. And, with all this entails. We've got the second slowest growing economy in the G20. I think we're just below. I think Russia is just below us. Our global power seeps away with a little bit more with every week, and you've got this bizarre political party which has destroyed itself on the back of this ludicrous, insane project, still somehow trotting forward and sort of trying to deny reality.
Well, Brexit does eat its children, no?
Brexit has definitely eaten its children. I think it's also destroyed the Conservative Party. I mean, that's going to be the thing that history will look back on, because I think any future, the next administration, if it is Labour, they will navigate a path through. They will make an agreement, and though I don't see us rejoining the EU at any decade soon, I do think some arrangement will be made to navigate us going forward through with our relationship with the EU. a bespoke agreement of some sort. But all of the chaos that was predicted, all of the chaos also, incidentally, which was written off as Project Fear. Whenever anybody raised a perfectly legitimate point back in 2016, such as what's going to happen with Northern Ireland, Project Fear, what's going to happen given that we import 50% of our fruit and veg from the rest of the world, Project Fear.
I've never seen such utter tosh in my entire life. Unlike these civil servants sitting in Whitehall, I spent 20 years in international trade, buying and selling goods and shipping them all over the world. And the idea, given there are over 100 ports in the United Kingdom, that even if there was a problem at Dover, there'd be food shortages, is complete and utter rubbish. It's Project Fear, Mark II. It should be utterly, completely, totally disregarded.
Now we see all of those Project Fear things coming true. It wasn't Project Fear, it was perfectly rational thought. And this is what upsets me largely about Brexit. Rational thinking, logic, and the sort of political science was all chucked out of the window in pursuit of this balmy nationalist project, which was always going to be a disaster. It was always going to go wrong, and it continues to go wrong.
Simon, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, that was pretty all-encompassing. But the first video I ever did on my channel was about, I believe that we will gravitate slowly over a long period of time to a Switzerland-style arrangement. Now, I don't think there will ever be we're back in the single market moment. I think it will be sort of piecemeal. And, I was listening to Keir Starmer being interviewed on the Newsagents podcast the other day, and, he was sort of saying, well, I'm going to sort of be striking a new deal with the European Union, so that we can sort of kind of have shared, sort of regulatory, alignment, and I think Emily Maitlis is like, what? So almost like a member of some shared market, perhaps. No, not that, not the single market, but, a shared relationship. It's like... And yeah, so I do think that I think that gradually the dogma will fade away over the next 30 years because, just younger generations won't care about it as much. And, and we will just slowly move to a closer relationship is the way I see it going.
Alex?
Max? Cross swords. Well, look at the Northern Ireland deal. You've got to look at the detail in that. The head of the DUP came out this week and suggested that it would be easier to send sausages into Ireland and then Northern Ireland than it is to have them just sent directly from Liverpool. And you're like, if that is true, this deal has literally done nothing. Like, there are still checks on the green lanes, which is being ignored. And then the newspapers have come out and said this is brilliant, as if it's over. But if the DUP are hacked off, I can't see that working.
And see, there's a huge hole in this whole process as well. So they need 30 MLAs. The DUP currently have 25. So they need to bring people in from the EUP and the TUV. There's only one guy in the TUV, so they still wouldn't have enough. So they need to convince other MLAs to join this. But let's say they do. They have enough to trigger this. But then it goes to somebody who will decide if this is valid. And we don't know who that somebody is yet. It could be the Secretary of State. It could be the UK government. We don't know. But let's say even if they say, yeah, we allow this to go ahead, then it has to go to the Joint Committee. But with the break, yeah, it's there are a lot of questions to be answered. But something I want to just come back to what Otto said about it's like almost like a cult. It's when I look at Brexit, and I was talking to Alex about this yesterday, it's generally when we're looking for is Brexit a problem, or is it are there benefits to Brexit? We generally look at the evidence, and then the evidence leads us to a conclusion. But the problem I have with Brexit here is that they start off with the idea that Brexit is a success, and then they look for something that backs that up. Instead of actually following the evidence, okay, let's look at GDP, let's look at trade, let's look at freedom of movement, let's look at all of these things, and then come to a conclusion. And I think this is a huge problem with the discussion around Brexit. Is on the one side you have people who are, I believe, truly want to understand whether it has been a success or not, or whether this aspect of Brexit is good for the UK or not. And on the other side, you have basically a religion where they start off with the position that Brexit is good. Now let me look for something to back that up. And it's...
Yes. I mean, there's the famous book, isn't there, where When Prophecy Fails by Leon Festinger, written in the 1950s. I don't know if you're familiar with that. He was basically researching a cult called the Seekers that were in Chicago in 1954. They believed they were communicating with a planet called the planet Clarion through a process of psychic writing. And these people in this cult in Chicago were told by the aliens from the planet Clarion that they would be coming on New Year's Eve, 1954, and that they were going to take them off and the whole world was going to be destroyed. What is unique and fascinating about that cult is that they were all educated middle-class people. They were not sort of roving lunatics in tinfoil hats. And they managed to lull themselves collectively into believing that this alien spaceship was going to come and was going to take them away. They gave up their jobs, they left marriages, they sold their possessions. I mean, the most extraordinary story. And then on Christmas Eve, 1954, they all gathered outside this woman called Dorothy's house and waited for the aliens to come. Of course, the aliens didn't come. So the prophecy failed. However, and this is the fascinating bit, instead of accepting that maybe this was a fucking crazy idea, and that maybe they were not actually communicating through psychic writing with these aliens from the planet Clarion, they began to double down. And they began to think that by communicating with them, they had stopped the destruction of the earth. And this cult went on and on and on. Now, it might seem, and if I was a Brexiter, I would think it was a ludicrous comparison. But there is a lot of similarity, because the Brexit thing in the first place was totally unnecessary. It was totally unnecessary. And they created a sort of psychodrama around the EU that didn't exist. And then they sought to resolve a problem that didn't really exist. And now they're claiming that it's not the fault of the prophecy, it is the fault of everything else. It's the doubters. In that group, the Seekers, they had a real problem with the doubters, the people who didn't believe, the naysayers. And you see the same thing. You see the sort of demonization of Remainers and people like that. Remainers I don't really like the term Remainers, particularly since we've now left the EU, so there are no Remainers. But apart from anything else, it was just people trying to point out that it was all bonkers.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, I think the thing is, I mean, everybody in this conversation uses things like, you were saying sort of GDP, trade figures, that kind of stuff to base our opinion. I think the thing is, and it's not fundamentally wrong, it's just different to how we view it, is that Brexiters use fundamentally different metrics. They might say, some Brexiters might say, I know it'll cost us, but actually, I think sovereignty trumps that. I'm willing to lose my freedom of movement and lose, 4% off the economy if it means that we can decide our own rules, which I think that's an odd way of doing it. And I think the other thing is I think it's an argument that can only be maintained for so long. It's all rah Britain, okay, right. Then 10 years goes by.
Sorry to interrupt you, and I agree with you 100%. And this is the problem with where the media come in, because you'd have a politician or you'd have a Brexiteer who'd say, yeah, but we wanted our sovereignty. And then they move on to the next point instead of asking them two questions. What does sovereignty mean? Yeah. And second, what about NATO? What about the United Nations? What about the World Trade Organization? You give up some sovereignty, and I've been trying to get into discussions with Brexiteers. Like, for example, if you're, you give up a bit of sovereignty to join the local club, the local organization. You give up your weekend. You give up your Thursday afternoon. Like, this is... But you get something in return. The Brexiteers focus on, we lost all our sovereignty when we were a member of the European Union. Then I have the question, of course, is Italy not sovereign? Is France not sovereign? Germany not sovereign? Ireland not sovereign? So, unfortunately, Ukraine it's always, there's a focus on what we have lost and not what we had. And there's never a follow-up on, in any sort of critical way of what the people are actually saying. So they'll just say sovereignty and, okay, sovereignty, and let's move on to the next point. No, explain to me what sovereignty is. And don't you know that you give up a certain amount of sovereignty when you join an organization like NATO or the World Trade Organization? But there's never any follow-up there, and that's a huge problem, I think.
Nobody ever talked about sovereignty before 2016.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe on the fringes of the of the Leave movement, which existed back then, or maybe the likes of Farage might have talked about it, but this was one of those terms that nobody ever really discussed. It was I mean, for me, really the thesis of my book, a lot of this kind of goes back to Britain's post-war sort of existential crisis as to what it was and what it was about. And for the likes of Dan Hannan and probably Nigel Farage as well, this all really goes back to the belief, and it is a belief, that Britain is, and should always be some great superpower, and that we were somehow done out of our destiny by joining the EEC back in the early 1970s. I mean, that's at the root of the belief system, because I think you do have to look at it like a belief system. And all of these other things, all of these other trappings like sovereignty, they're just useful terms to be bandied around in order to try and win some argument that isn't really there in the first place. I mean, as you beautifully articulated, no nation on earth, I think apart from perhaps North Korea, is not part of some sort of global organization. And also, what have they tried? What has the Conservative Party tried to do in the years following Brexit? They've tried to get us into this Pacific economic zone. Where's the vote on that? Where's our sovereignty on that? Do we have to have a referendum every time this country makes an agreement and gives away some of this precious sovereignty that nobody talked about prior to 2016? I mean, it's an insane way to run a country.
It also just highlights the bonkersness of it, the fact that we would leave a trading bloc on our doorstep to go to one in the Pacific Ocean.
Yes. The trade deals with New Zealand and Australia, which I wrote about at Sonnet, they were so bonkers. Even the government's own figures demonstrated that the trade deal between the UK and New Zealand would actually knock something like 0.5% off our GDP.
It hammered the farmers.
Yes, British farming. Yeah.
Is the reason for Oxford United, my hometown team, is the reason for Oxford United not being in the Premier League and having Lionel Messi, Neymar, and Mbappe because the fans don't believe enough? Or is it the fact that internally there are people who don't believe it enough and they're holding us back? Now, I'd not thought about this before, but Mourinho did something similar to this when he was first at Chelsea. And it was very clever in some ways. He created a siege mentality. He made out that Chelsea was the new kid on the block and that everyone was against them, including the league, because they didn't want Chelsea to win. Now, this created an amazing siege mentality and a really good team ethos, especially because he could come in and say, I've won something, the players haven't yet. I can create that. And the siege mentality happened to help. But here, it hasn't happened. And the other interesting thing I find, if the government really wanted to, someone needs to somehow unify the country and find something that'll get everyone together. And one of the key things to that would be to have an enemy. Now, the obvious choice would have been Putin, especially as he dumped chemical and nuclear materials over the south of England. And yet, did they make him the enemy? No. In fact, they actually tried to suppress the actual report. Now, we could go into conspiracy theories on that. And this segues quite nicely into other conspiracy theories that we wanted to talk about, such as the 15-minute cities.
Just on that last point, I noticed today that Cleverly has condemned, James Cleverly has been busy condemning Argentina because they have withdrawn from some agreement over the Falklands. I didn't actually go into the detail of it. Argentina has elections coming up in October, a general election. And so once again, the Argentinians are playing the old game of, toy with the Malvinas and all that kind of stuff. But it also, talking about a common enemy, yes, the Argentinians have done that, but I suspect there was delight in the Foreign Office when this news came through, because once again, I can almost guarantee that there will be a front page of The Sun in the next 48 hours about Argentina, distracting from all of the other stuff that is going on.
Yes.
And whipping it up. And that's not a conspiracy. That's just an observation based on the last 40 years of this country post-Falklands War.
There's definitely a huge amount of animosity. I mean, there's a huge amount of animosity between us and just about everywhere in the world. I mean, most football or cricket or rugby games that you get involved in, there'll be an extra special thing if the English are turning up to have a game. And Argentina is like definitely going to use that as a vaulting point. And maybe they'll also be doing what Putin did and going, well, Britain's looking weak right now. Let's consider exploiting it again. As well as in a very interesting position. I mean, you were talking about Asia. I've been saying now for the last 4 or 5 weeks, I think China and Russia will probably collapse in the next 10 to 25 years for a variety of reasons I won't go into. Argentina, interestingly, is in a very powerful position. It's got a ton of mineral resources available to it, which is what is going to be probably the geopolitical important thing for the next 10 to 25 years. And so every chance that is actually a contentious issue that's on the horizon again and could be a huge problem. We can't finance that. We're not in that position to send a fleet down there to protect them. Like, no chance. You ain't going to need.
I don't think it will lead to that. I mean, Argentina. I find. I mean, it's a side discussion. I find it's a fascinating country, largely because it reminds me a lot of the United Kingdom. In South America, of all the nations in South America, Argentina kind of has the biggest kind of aspirations and sort of mythos about itself as a kind of, Argentinian exceptionalism ranks highly alongside British and French exceptionalism as one of the quintessential exceptionalismists of the world.
Well, interestingly, there's a conspiracy within that, and it's interesting we bring up exceptionalism because we could always talk about all the Nazis that legged it over there and built up communities.
Yeah, I've just been writing about Che Guevara for my next book, actually, and all of Argentina has become a source of some fascination. But anyway, let's move along.
Tune in next week for another exciting story from the files of Police Squad.